The long corridor of the alien tower was always silent at night. Only the faint hum of machines could be heard. The walls were made of shining metal and glowing blue lights marked every corner. Humans were not supposed to walk here unless they worked as cleaners. The human janitor, Mark, carried his mop and a small cleaning bot by his side. He was an ordinary man, his uniform old and patched, his boots heavy with dust. He kept his head down and worked quietly. In this place, no one cared about humans. They were invisible. But that night, something unusual happened. At the far end of the corridor, he noticed a small figure, a child, sitting near the wall. The child had dropped a tray of food, pieces of fruit and liquid spread across the shining floor. The boy struggled to reach them, but his legs did not move well. He was disabled, his arms weak. The tray slid further away. Mark froze for a moment. He knew who the child was, the son of the alien billionaire, the most powerful woman in the city. Her wealth controlled starships and colonies. She owned this entire tower. Everyone feared her. Her child was rarely seen, and when he appeared, no one dared to come close. The boy made a small sound, half frustration and half pain. His long alien eyes filled with tears. He tried again to reach the fruit, but his arms shook. Mark felt his chest tighten. It was not his duty to help. If guards saw him touch the child, he could lose his job, maybe even his life. But still he took a step forward. Slowly, he knelt on the floor, his mop placed gently aside. "Easy there," Mark whispered softly, his voice low but kind. He picked up the pieces of fruit and set them back on the tray. Then he wiped the spilled liquid with careful movements. The boy watched him with wide eyes, his breathing uneven. The child reached out. Mark guided the tray closer so the boy could eat. For the first time, a small smile touched the child's lips. His strange alien features softened. His shoulders relaxed. Mark did not speak much more. He only cleaned and stayed beside the boy, giving him company in the empty corridor. What Mark did not know was that hidden eyes were watching, high above the corridor, behind a wall of dark glass. The alien billionaire herself sat in her private chamber. She often monitored the security screens. Her life was filled with numbers and reports, but that night she saw something that made her pause. On the screen she saw her child, usually alone, usually ignored, and beside him, the human janitor, not afraid, not cold, but gentle. She leaned forward, her hands pressing against the glass. She had hired many alien servants, all left her child crying. None had the patience to stay. But this man, this simple human, showed a kindness that none of her wealth could buy. In the corridor, Mark rose to his feet. He adjusted his uniform and gave the boy a small nod. "You'll be all right," he said. Even though he knew the child could not fully understand his words, then he turned back to his mop and bucket, finishing the job as if nothing unusual had happened. The boy watched him leave, his smile fading but his eyes glowing with a light not seen before. The silent corridor felt less empty, less cold. Up in her chamber, the billionaire pressed a button, freezing the screen. Her eyes narrowed. For the first time in years, she felt curiosity. Who was this human? Why did he act so differently? Why did he show care when others only showed fear? She saved the recording. Her mind already forming questions, Mark walked on, unaware of the storm his small action had created. The corridor behind him shining clean, but filled with a secret that would soon change his life. The machines hummed, the lights glowed, and in the silent corridor a new story had begun. The tower never slept, even when night stretched across the alien city. Inside the high walls of the billionaire's private chamber, bright screens glowed with endless numbers, trading charts, and reports from far-off colonies. She was a woman who could buy starships with a single order, who could crush rivals with one command. Yet that night her eyes were not on business. They were on one frozen image. The screen showed her child in the silent corridor, and beside him, a human janitor, kneeling, helping, his face calm, his hands steady. She replayed the moment again, and again the mop set aside, the gentle words, the way her son smiled. She had never seen her boy smile like that. Not with doctors, not with alien nurses, not even with her. The billionaire leaned back in her tall chair, her long silver hair flowing like liquid light. Her alien features sharp but tired, she had built an empire, yet in her heart lived a constant wound. Her child was born weak. His legs never carried him far. His arms trembled when he tried to hold things. Other children mocked him, and even her closest advisors whispered that he was a shame, a weakness in her bloodline. She never let them say it twice. She silenced them with her power. But in the silence of her own chambers, she carried the weight of those words. Now she stared at the janitor's face. A simple man, his uniform old, his boots dirty, his head always bowed in public. Why did he stop for her son? Why did he risk being punished just to help? Money could buy loyalty, but this was not loyalty, it was something else. Her chief advisor entered the room, his tall form bowing. "My lady, the Trading Council waits for your orders," he said, his voice smooth but cold. "Later," she answered, her eyes never leaving the screen. The advisor followed her gaze. He saw the image and frowned. "A janitor?" he muttered. "Shall I have him removed? It is dangerous to allow a human so near your son." Her fingers tapped the arm of her chair. She thought carefully. She could order his removal, erase him from the tower in an instant. No one would question. But a part of her resisted. "No," she said, "not yet." The advisor hesitated, confusion flashing across his face. "My lady, humans are simple. They seek money, food, or escape. He is nothing more." The billionaire turned her head slowly, her eyes sharp. "He is something more to my son," she whispered, her voice low but cutting. The advisor bowed quickly, retreating, but his mind was filled with unease. Alone again, she pressed another button. The screen showed different angles, the janitor's quiet steps, his steady hands, her child's eyes full of trust. She saved the entire recording into a private file. Far below in the tower, Mark, the janitor, was finishing his shift. He moved from corridor to corridor, cleaning as always. He did not know his actions were being studied. He only knew that helping the child felt right. He thought about the boy's smile as he packed up his mop. A small smile touched his own lips. It had been a long time since anyone looked at him like that. Back in her chamber, the billionaire rose from her chair. She walked to the wide glass window that showed the endless city lights. Ships rose into the sky like fireflies. She thought of the empire she built, the power she held, and yet all of it meant nothing when her son's laughter was missing. She remembered the day doctors told her nothing could be done. Her child would always be weak, always struggle. She had felt rage, shame, sorrow, and for years she hid him away, protecting him from cruel eyes, but hiding did not heal his heart. And now one human janitor had done in minutes what her money could not. Her child had smiled. The thought would not leave her mind. She needed to know more. She needed to test him. Was it luck? Was it chance, or was it something deeper? The next day, hidden orders were sent. Mark's records were pulled, his background scanned, everything about him studied. He was ordinary, no family in the city, debts unpaid, working, small jobs to survive, nothing special, and yet he had reached her child's heart. She sat at her desk, fingers steepled under her chin, the city below glowing like a sea of stars. She whispered to herself, "Maybe, just maybe, this human is the key." In the tower's lower quarters, Mark lay on his narrow bed, unaware of the storm he had awakened, unaware that the most powerful alien in the city now knew his name. The corridors would no longer be silent. The walls themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting for what would come next. Because the watcher behind the glass had made her choice, she would not let this human slip away. And so, the game began. Mark arrived for work as usual, carrying his mop, bucket, and the small cleaning bot that often trailed behind him. The tower loomed as always, tall, silent, full of glowing walls that whispered of power beyond his reach. To him it was just another day, another long list of floors to clean. He never imagined his life was about to change. The lower workers whispered as he passed by, their voices low. "That's the one, the human who touched the child." One alien hissed. Another shook her head. "He won't last the week, the guards will deal with him." Mark heard them but kept walking. He had no energy for gossip. He had only come to work. Halfway through his shift, heavy footsteps echoed behind him. He turned and saw two alien guards in dark armor, their glowing staffs crossed in front of him. "Mark, janitor of Section 9, one said. "You are summoned." Mark blinked, confusion filling. His chest summoned. Humans like him were never summoned. Workers lived in the shadows, invisible to the powerful. Summoned by who? He asked carefully, his voice steady though his heart thudded in his chest. "By the lady herself," the guard answered coldly. "The lady, the billionaire, the ruler of the tower." Mark's throat went dry. Workers only saw her on screens, never. In person, those who did were usually nobles, traitors, or criminals being judged. None ever returned the same. The guards didn't wait for his answer. They turned and marched, and he had no choice but to follow. Whispers followed him through the halls. "He's finished. He'll never come back. Humans don't belong near her." The words dug into him, but he kept walking. They passed the bright corridors of the higher levels, places Mark had only cleaned from the outside. Here the walls were lined with silver and glass. Lights shimmered like stars. Alien servants bowed low, staring at him with curiosity. A human janitor walking under guard into the upper floors. It was unthinkable. Finally, they reached massive doors carved with glowing symbols. The guards pushed them open and motioned him inside. Mark stepped forward, his boots echoing on the polished floor. The chamber was vast, filled with towering windows that showed the city stretching endlessly. The air smelled faintly of ozone and perfume. At the far end sat the billionaire herself, her silver hair gleaming, her gown flowing like liquid metal. Her eyes sharp. Mark froze. He felt like an ant standing before a storm. He wanted to bow, to hide, but he forced himself to stand straight, his mop still clutched in his hand. Beside her throne-like chair, sitting quietly, was the child, his thin arms resting on the edge of his seat. His eyes lit up the moment he saw Mark. The boy's face softened into a smile, small but real. The billionaire noticed, her sharp eyes flicking from her son to the janitor. She raised one hand, her voice low but commanding. "Come closer." Mark walked slowly, every step heavy. He stopped a few feet away, waiting. The silence. Stretched, he could feel the weight of her gaze. She lifted her hand again, this time pointing to the boy. "Clean," she said simply, her voice like steel. Mark blinked, confused, then realized a small mess was on the child's table. A spilled drink, crumbs scattered, nothing unusual, but he understood this was a test. He set down his mop and bucket, kneeling beside the table. He cleaned carefully, not rushing, his movements calm. When he finished, he looked at the boy and smiled. "There, better now," he said softly. The boy giggled. Actually giggled, his thin shoulders shaking with joy. He picked up a crumb and offered it to Mark as if sharing. Mark laughed quietly and shook his head. "You eat, little one," he whispered, from her chair. The billionaire's face remained unreadable, but inside she felt something twist in her chest. Her son had not laughed like that in years. The guards shifted uneasily, their hands tight on their weapons, but she raised her hand slightly and they stilled. Her gaze never left Mark. "You are a janitor," she said, her voice cold. "Yet my son smiles at you. Why?" Mark swallowed, unsure how to answer. I don't know, my lady. Maybe because I treated him like a child, not like a burden." The words slipped out before he could stop them. The room went still, the guard's eyes widened. No one spoke like that to her. But instead of rage, the billionaire leaned back, studying him, her eyes narrowed but curious. "Interesting," she whispered. The boy tugged at Mark's sleeve, looking at him with pleading eyes. Mark stayed beside him, ignoring the tension in the room. The billionaire rose slowly from her chair, her gown shimmering. She walked closer. Her presence overwhelming, Mark resisted the urge to step back. She looked at her son, then at the human, then back at the child's smile. For the first time in years, she felt a sliver of something strange. Hope. "Very well," she said, her voice softer but still strong. "You will return tomorrow. You will continue to clean not the tower but my son." Mark stared at her, shocked. He had expected punishment, maybe death, not this. But before he could speak, she turned away, dismissing him with a wave. The guards let him out. The doors closing behind, his mind racing. He had survived, but more than that, he had been chosen. Down in the lower levels, whispers spread like fire. The human is alive. The lady summoned him and spared him. Why? No one knew the answer. Not yet. But in the silent heart of the tower, a new bond had begun to form. And with it, danger and change that neither the human nor the billionaire could yet imagine. The game had shifted, and Mark was now a piece on the board, whether he wanted it or not. The next day. Mark walked into the tower with heavier steps than before. His mop and bucket felt heavier too. Not because of weight, but because of what had happened the night before. He had been summoned, tested, and instead of punishment, he was ordered to return. He kept wondering. Why him? Why not one of the hundreds of alien servants waiting for the chance to please the billionaire? The whispers followed him again, louder this time. The lady spared him. He touched the child and lived. He must have done something strange. Some voices carried fear, others envy. But all agreed something had shifted in the tower. When the guards came again, their armored boots clanging against the floor, Mark did not resist. He followed, his heart steady but uneasy. He had no idea what waited beyond those massive doors this time. The chamber looked the same, vast, shining with high windows showing the endless city sky. The billionaire sat on her throne-like chair, her eyes sharp as ever, her long silver hair flowing around her shoulders. But this time she did not speak. She only pointed toward the child. The boy sat near a low table, blocks scattered before him, strange alien toys that shifted shapes when touched. His thin hands shook as he tried to build something. Each time the blocks fell apart. His eyes filled with frustration. His lips trembled. Mark knelt down without being told. He gently touched one of the blocks, showing the boy how to hold it, how to balance it with another. But the boy's shaking hands knocked it over again. The boy screamed, a sound of pure frustration. He pushed the blocks hard. They scattered across the floor. In his anger, he also shoved the tray of food, juice spilling onto the polished table, crumbs scattering. The guards stiffened, ready to drag the janitor away for failing. But Mark stayed, calm. He reached for the towel in his bucket and wiped the spill slowly, his voice soft. "It's all right, little one, we'll try again," he said, not rushing, not raising his voice. The boy hit the table again, his small fists trembling. He cried, his body weak but his emotions heavy. Mark didn't move away. Instead, he sat down on the floor, cross-legged, lowering himself to the boy's level. "See this?" Mark picked up a block and held it carefully. He blew softly across the surface, creating a tiny whistle sound the alien toy made when touched that way. The boy blinked through his tears, curious. Mark smiled. "It sings, but only if you're gentle," he whispered. He placed the block into the boy's hands and guided him slowly, helping him blow air across it. A faint whistle echoed, weak but real. The boy's crying slowed, his wide alien eyes fixed on the sound. For the next minutes, Mark showed him tricks, balancing blocks like towers, making simple shapes, blowing on them to create faint tunes. The boy began to mimic him, his weak hands shaking but steadying little by little. The billionaire watched in silence from her throne, her face still cold but her heart stirred. She had seen countless tutors give up on her son, frustrated at his weakness, angry at his failure. But this human did not give up. He stayed, calm and patient, as if he had all the time in the world. Hours passed like that, until at last the boy made a small stack of 3 blocks, crooked but standing. His eyes widened. His lips curved into a small smile. He looked up at Mark as if he had done something impossible. Mark nodded, smiling back. "You did it, little one," he said warmly. The boy giggled, reaching for another block, and for the first time in months he laughed. A real laugh, pure and unbroken. The billionaire's chest tightened, her sharp mask almost cracking. She looked at the guards, their faces stiff but their eyes softened. Even they could not deny what they saw. Her child was not broken in this moment. He was alive. Still, she did not let emotion show. She leaned forward and spoke, her voice firm. "You may go." Mark looked up, surprised, but he nodded, gathering his things. As he left, the boy reached out, grabbing his sleeve weakly, not wanting him to go. Mark gently patted the child's hand. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised. The boy's eyes brightened at those words. When Mark left the chamber, the billionaire stayed in her chair, her fingers clenched tight. She had seen her son's joy, but she also knew the danger if word spread that a human, a janitor, could succeed where the best doctors failed. Her rivals would twist it. They would say she had lost her pride, her empire could weaken, yet she could not deny the truth. Her son needed him. In the lower quarters, Mark sat on his small bed later that night. Staring at his calloused hands, he thought about the boy's laughter. A sound so pure it echoed in his ears. It gave him a strange warmth he hadn't felt in years. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. He did not know what the billionaire was planning, but deep inside he knew one thing. He could not turn away from that child now, not after seeing that smile. And high above, the billionaire looked once more at the frozen image on her screen. Her son laughing beside the human, her voice low as she whispered to herself, "Patience, something I never bought. But he gives freely." She closed her eyes, torn between empire and motherhood, between pride and love. The test was over, but the real trial had just begun. The tower of the billionaire stood like a silver mountain in the middle of the alien city, its lights glowing across the skyline, but inside its walls something unusual was happening, and whispers began to spread like fire. The story of a human janitor spending time with the lady's disabled child was no longer a secret. Servants spoke in kitchens, guards murmured in corners, traders whispered in markets, and by nightfall the entire city knew. A human touched the air, one alien said with shock, and he lived to tell the tale. Another sneered, "He must have tricked her somehow, maybe he begged for mercy." But some voices spoke with curiosity. The boy laughed, they say. For the first time in years, rumors traveled faster than ships, soon reaching noble houses. And rival empires, many laughed. Some were angry, others were simply intrigued, but all agreed on one thing. It was dangerous. The lady was changing, and change meant weakness. Meanwhile, Mark continued his quiet routine, cleaning floors, carrying his mop, spending time with the boy. Each day he showed him new tricks, stacking blocks, folding cloth into simple shapes, drawing pictures with soap bubbles. The child grew attached to him quickly, smiling when Mark arrived, crying when he left. Mark didn't seek power or favor. He didn't think of politics. He only thought of the boy's laughter. To him it was worth more than gold. But the higher nobles thought differently. At a grand gathering in a floating hall above the city, alien lords and merchants gathered to drink and gossip. One of them slammed his glass down. "This is madness, the richest woman in the empire, letting a human janitor near her heir. It makes her look weak." Another laughed bitterly. "Perhaps she lost her mind, grief and shame broke her, and now she hides behind a human's kindness." But one, older and wiser, shook his head. "Or perhaps she sees something we do not. Humans are strange. They carry fire in small hearts, fire that cannot be bought." Back in the tower, the billionaire heard all of it. Reports from her spies, whispers from her advisors, warnings from her council. One advisor stood before her now, bowing low, his voice trembling. "My lady, forgive me, but you must end this," he said. "The council is restless. The markets are shaking. Rivals laugh at us. They say the Lady of Silver Towers lets a janitor rule her heart." The billionaire sat still, her face like carved stone. She listened but did not answer. She turned her gaze to the screen on her wall, where she watched her son, laughing as Mark made the cleaning bot chase a rolling fruit. The boy's giggles filled the chamber through the speakers. Her advisor grew pale. "You cannot let this continue. If you do, you risk everything you built." She finally turned her eyes to him, sharp and cold. "Everything I built," she said, her voice cutting. "Like a blade was meant to protect my child. What use is an empire if he cannot smile within it?" The advisor flinched, bowing deeper. "Forgive me, my lady," he whispered, backing away, but his eyes were full of fear. Later that night, alone in her chamber, The billionaire walked to her son's room quietly. She stood by the door, unseen, watching as Mark helped the boy onto a cushioned seat by the window. The child's frail hands clung to Mark's arm. Pointing at the stars, Mark spoke softly. "Those lights out there. On Earth, we used to wish upon stars. Maybe you can too." The boy whispered something, his first clear word to Mark. "Wish." His alien tongue struggling but real. Mark froze, shocked, then smiled gently. "Yes, wish," he repeated. The billionaire's hand trembled against the doorframe. She had begged doctors for years to make her son speak. None succeeded. Yet here, in a quiet moment, with no machines, no medicine, just a human's patience, her son spoke. She closed her eyes, but even as her heart swelled, her mind warned her of the storm outside. By morning, more rumors spread. Some said the billionaire planned to adopt the human into her house. Others claimed the janitor was her secret lover. Some went as far as to whisper he bewitched her child with forbidden powers. Mark heard fragments of these whispers, but he ignored them. He had no time for lies, only for the boy. Yet he could not escape the stares. When he walked through the corridors, servants bowed lower. Guards looked longer, some with respect, others with hate. One evening, as he finished his work, a shadowy figure approached him in the lower levels, cloaked and hidden. The figure whispered sharply, "Leave while you can, human. The Empire will not forgive you. The lady cannot protect you forever." Mark's jaw tightened. He wanted to reply, but the figure melted into the darkness, leaving only the warning echoing in his ears. Up in her high chamber, the billionaire stood once again before her city window, her reflection glowing against the stars. She knew the Empire was watching, her rivals sharpening their knives, but she also knew something else. She had seen her son laugh, and no rumor, no threat, no counsel could take that memory from her. Still, the war between heart and empire had only begun, and deep down she understood. If she kept the human by her side, she would not only save her son, she would also make enemies she had never faced before. The rumors had become a storm, and storms always brought lightning. The question was, where would the first strike fall? The following days moved like quiet waves, yet each one brought something new. Mark returned again and again to the Silver Tower, each time expecting guards to stop him, or the billionaire to change her mind. But each time he was led to the child's chamber without a word. The boy waited by the window now, his thin body leaning forward, eyes wide whenever the door opened. When he saw Mark, his smile spread bright across his pale face. It was not just relief, it was trust. Mark spent hours with him, teaching him little games, folding towels into shapes, making simple shadows with the light, even telling him stories about rivers, forests, and skies of Earth, places the boy had never seen. The billionaire watched often from her hidden chamber, her sharp eyes never missing a moment. Her son was changing. She could see it in his posture, his laughter, his eagerness. Something was awakening inside him, something she thought lost forever. Still, doubt haunted her. She sat alone at night, staring at reports from her advisors, letters from rival nobles, all warning of her empire's image. She was torn between duty and love, between the steel mask she wore and the trembling warmth in her chest. Then came the evening that would change everything. The boy sat on the floor with Mark, blocks scattered between them. The human showed him how to balance them into a small tower, his hands steady, his voice calm. "Careful now, gentle, steady," Mark whispered. The boy tried, his thin fingers shaking, 2 blocks stacked, then 3. The 4th wobbled and fell. The boy's lip trembled, frustration rising. But before tears came, Mark placed a hand gently over his, steadying him. "You can do it," Mark said softly, his voice full of quiet strength. "I believe in you." The boy's eyes lifted, wide and uncertain. And then, slowly, his lips moved. A sound escaped, faint, broken, but real. Believe," he whispered. The word cracked, almost a breath. But clear. Mark froze. His chest tightening, he stared at the boy. "Say it again," he urged gently. The boy struggled, his voice trembling. "Believe," he said once more, this time stronger, his eyes shining with pride. Mark's throat tightened, emotion burning. In his chest he laughed softly, tears stinging his eyes. "That's it, little one, that's it," he whispered. The boy giggled, delighted by his own success. He clapped weakly, repeating again, "Believe. Believe." At that moment, the doors opened quietly. The billionaire stepped in, her silver gown flowing like moonlight. She had intended only to watch unseen, but when she heard the word, she froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Her son turned to her, his face glowing, and in his trembling voice he called out, "Mother." The sound shattered her like glass. She had longed for that word for years. Doctors said he might never speak. Tutors gave up, and now, with one human by his side, he spoke it. She dropped to her knees beside him. Her cold mask breaking, tears filling her sharp eyes, she cupped his face in her hands. "My son," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Say it again." "Mother," he said, weak but clear, smiling at her. She pulled him close, holding him tightly, her tears falling onto his hair. She had not cried in years, not even when enemies threatened her empire. But here, in her child's arms, she broke. Mark sat quietly watching, his own heart heavy with emotion. He knew this was not his moment, it belonged to them, mother and son. The billionaire lifted her head, her eyes red but fierce. She looked at Mark, for the first time, not as a servant, not as a tool, but as something far greater. Her voice was raw when she spoke. "You gave me my son." Mark shook his head softly. "No, my lady." He found his own voice. "I only listened." But she knew the truth. She knew what she had seen, and the knowledge terrified her, because if word of this spread, if her rivals learned that a human janitor had succeeded where her empire failed, they would tear her apart, not out of pity, but out of envy and fear. That night, after the boy slept peacefully, whispering "believe" in his dreams, the billionaire stood alone in her high chamber, the city glowing beyond the glass, her hands clenched behind her back. Her advisors begged her to dismiss the human. Her enemies laughed, her counsel whispered, yet her son had spoken. She thought of her empire, of her power, of the millions who looked to her for strength. And then she thought of that one word, "mother," spoken by her child for the first time. She closed her eyes, torn between two worlds, one made of steel and fire, the other of laughter and fragile hope. And somewhere deep inside, she knew the choice she made next would not only shape her son's future, but the future of the entire empire. The human had awakened a voice that no gold, no medicine, no power could buy, and now the galaxy would soon learn of it. ***. The empire did not sleep, and neither did the rumors. By the time a new sun rose above the alien city, the entire world was speaking of the Lady of Silver Towers, her child, and the human janitor. Some said the human was her secret weapon. Others whispered he was her weakness. Rival nobles sent spies to confirm the truth, while merchants bet fortunes on whether she would keep him or cast him out. In the lower levels of the tower, Mark tried to carry on as usual, but he could not escape the stares. Aliens stepped aside when he passed, some bowed slightly, others glared with hatred. To them, he was no longer just a janitor. He was a mystery, a symbol of something they could not understand. Up above, the billionaire stood in her council chamber, a long table filled with advisors and nobles, their voices clashing like storms. "My lady," one cried, "you must remove the human. The empire laughs at us." Another snarled, "If word spreads that a janitor saved your son where we could not, your throne will crumble." But one voice, softer, spoke differently. "Or perhaps," an elder whispered, "this shows your strength, that you see value where others see nothing." The room grew tense, all eyes turned to her, but the billionaire said nothing, her face unreadable, her mind torn. Later that day, she entered her son's chamber, the boy looked up at her smiling, his lips shaping a word he had learned just days before. "Mother," he whispered, his weak hands reaching for her. Her heart cracked again, softer than steel now. She held him close, and over his shoulder she saw Mark standing quietly in the corner, his mop set aside, his hands folded, his eyes steady. He did not bow, he did not tremble, he simply stood as if he belonged, and maybe he did. That evening she summoned the guards, her advisors, her council, and even representatives of rival houses. The chamber filled with figures cloaked in wealth and power. Whispers rippled like waves. Everyone knew something was about to happen. The doors opened, and Mark was brought in, not in chains, but escorted with respect. He looked around, confused but calm. He stopped in the center of the room, feeling the weight of 100 eyes on him. The billionaire rose from her throne, tall and shining, her silver hair glowing in the high light. Her voice rang out, steady and strong. "You all whisper of weakness," she began. "You all laugh. That a human janitor brought my son to smile, you think this shames me?" She paused, her eyes burning. "But you are wrong." The hall grew silent. No one dared breathe. She lifted her hand, pointing toward Mark. "This human gave me something none of you could. Something no amount of wealth or medicine could buy. He gave my son a voice, he gave him hope." A ripple of shock swept through the chamber. Whispers rose, but her voice cut them down. "You say this makes me weak," she continued. "But I say it makes me stronger than all of you because I'm not afraid to see worth where others see dirt. I am not afraid to choose what is right over what is easy." She turned to Mark, her eyes fierce but softer than ever before. "From this day forward, you are no longer a janitor. You are guardian of my son, protector of his voice, and honored guest in my house." Gasps filled the chamber. Some nobles shouted in outrage, others stared in disbelief, but none dared defy her directly. Mark's eyes widened, his heart pounding. He had come to clean floors, and now he stood declared. As guardian to the heir of the empire, he wanted to protest, to say he was just a man, but the boy's eyes found his, glowing with trust, and Mark could not refuse. The billionaire's words rang out one final time. "Let it be known, this human stays, not because he is mine, but because he belongs to my son." The hall fell silent. No one dared to argue further. The decision was made. Later, when the chamber emptied and the stars glowed outside the high windows, Mark stood quietly by the boys. Sighed, the child leaned against him, whispering the word he loved most, "Believe." The billionaire watched them, her heart steady for the first time in years. She knew the storm outside would not end. Rivals would plot, nobles would sneer, enemies would sharpen their knives. But she also knew her son was smiling, speaking, living, and she whispered to herself, "Let them come, I will face them all for him." Mark looked at her, then at the boy, then back at the glowing city. He had no riches, no titles, but in that moment he felt he had more than all of them. The decision was made, and with it a new chapter for them all, the human, the alien child, and the billionaire who finally chose her heart over her throne. And in the silent tower, hope burned brighter than any star.